So here we have Rich's left-handed Pacifica. This is the nth of many Pacificas that I've had through recently, and this is a guitar that's a first electric guitar for somebody. So Rich has not been playing too long, and this is his first electric. So it's really critical that this plays in tune and stays in tune as an absolute first priority, but is also easy to play, and that's got to be a sort of critical part, the whole deal here, that's most important to get right, which is why I'm assuming and I'm hoping that he sent it to me. It's in very good condition. It's all over, you know, pretty, I mean, it's used, but it's very, very new out of the box almost. So there's hardly any damage. Oh, look at him fly over now as well. It's a whole new computer angle. No, that's not the word. Whole new thingy angle. Now, once you get up this end, you might notice something slightly unusual, and that is we've already got a Tusq nut, custom Tusq nut being made from a blank. Reason for this, and I'll put the original plastic one in place. The reason for this is because left-handed Tusq nuts for the Pacifica are literally like hen's teeth, as the old cliche goes. So they're incredibly difficult to find. I've not been able to find one for the last little while. So the alternative is to make one from a block, and I'll show you. Fly away with this new thing. Over to this messy table, which I won't stay on too long. Basically, that's the starting unit. So it's a single great big block, which I then can very carefully cut down, and you might just be able to see on the end there's part of my workings out. Let's try the zoom thing. Can we do this? Oh yeah. Here's some of my workings out on the end. That's to help me shape it. That was to get the exact width so it will fit perfectly. Now, as you can see, what's obvious about it is while it copies the position of the original strings perfectly, it's obviously still too high, so we'll need to cut down, and we'll also, once it's cut down, we'll need to round off and smooth out to a nice finish. But as a start point, it's feeling very good where it is, and there'll be a very small amount of adjustment to do afterwards. So that's our start point. So, you know, plastic nut from the Yamaha will go consigned to the dusty bin of history. So let me just whiz out to my one. Sorry, you can even go to this version, which is a little bit sort of way, a little bit whoa. But anyway, it's not bad. You can get everything in this way. You probably even see me in the bad light, like always. So there we have it. I suppose the plan is I'm going to put this to 1 and see what we can get in. It says it's a 26mm lens. So while it's standing over here doing average duty, I can have it plugged in and charging. Although this wire isn't perfectly ideal. It's sort of, that's the other phone guy. It's sort of, yeah, you know, it'll do. So the plan I have is I'll get on and do what I got to do. And when it comes to it, I'll move it around with me. And so hopefully I'll be able to get better shots as I go. Now, some of them I won't be able to see very well what I'm doing. Maybe I'll use the mirror, maybe I won't. So for example, if I was going to go up to this end without pulling things over, you'd say, well, you can't really see what you're doing there, Sam. And I get the mirror and I go, ah yes, but I can now see perfectly well that this thing is telling us all about the nut. And I have got just enough wire to get there. So I think that's a fairly feasible. I've got a thing in, it's partly obscuring the screen, but I can certainly see that this is getting up close and personal, as near as I need to get. And then if I have to come any closer, I can probably still do more, and I can still tell you where it is. But I just have to be aware of it. One of the things I tried to do was I tried to avoid having too many camera moves, because there's all that time spent thinking about where things are and what you're pointing at. And now I'm wondering whether, you know, is this on screen, off screen, whatever. So I'm going to take off this little marker here, so it's no longer, a little bit of green frog tape. It's no longer important to the cause. And I'm just going to tidy up this bottom bit. Just take off the sanded lip. And then I'm going to basically tack this down with a very light bit of glue on the underside. And that will be this in place. Now for that I really need the strings out of the way. I don't want much in the way of glue, so I'm just going to try and keep it to a minimum. I know which side is which, I'm pretty clear about that now. There's a bit on either side. Put my gluey matchstick thing out of the way, cocktail stick. Now here I'm going to push it into the little sort of gap that's here. Now while it's still potentially not quite set, I'm going to whack these strings back on. And technically I should, if I was being smart, I would do them up, but actually what I'm just going to do straight away is I'm just going to feel where they end up, and I'm going to do any possible movement that might need doing. I think that would be about it. So sorry if this gets in your way. Just try and get them sort of in place for a minute, just to hold the nut down. Really would be a good move, and it gives me a clearer look of where the strings are. Okay, they're all pretty well. There's a tiny bit to overhang on that side, but that's fine where I'm from. So this is really now just helping the nut to stay in place, help the gluing process. And of course everything's sitting too high up, so we've got quite a bit of work to do taking the action down. But just looking at it, this end's sticking up a tiny bit. Why is that? That ends in perfectly. I'm just going to tap this down with a small hammer, make sure it's in place. It suggests that there's something on the underside, or sorry, on the surface of the thingamajig. It's not bad actually, but it's not quite as per. Oh no, it is. Okay, that's not too bad at all. Let's just make sure it's where I want it. If it's necessary, or if necessary, I would take it off and reattach it. Yeah, that's okay. Yep. It's always a bit tricky, that part of it, because you don't want to end up with, sorry, I've moved the guitar now, you can't see anything. You don't want to end up with something stuck in the wrong place. You don't have too much time to mess about. And there isn't, I don't think there's a sort of super glue that says, I'll take about 30 seconds to set. There might be actually, probably somebody's invented such a clever thing. Okay. That is, what also strikes me is that the front end of this fingerboard is possibly very slightly curved inwards, because it's snug and tight at this end. It's just a tiny little bit of a hint of a gap at this end, which, I mean, it's not a problem. We could put a extra bit of glue in there and press it down, but that would make for some cleanup. I think I'm happy with it there. I might put a tiny drop of glue in there later on, but as it stands, it's perfectly well positioned. Okay, so I'll leave that as is. Checks with his mirror, sees what you can see. Yes, it's right in the picture. So the purpose of getting this nut on first, without really going through any of the other things, is that in order to get this guitar set up and start the process, I need to have the nut in place. And obviously we've taken out the original nut, so the important bit is to, hey look, there's two cameras. The important bit is to get this new nut in place, get it where I like it, and then I can cut that down, set the action, and we can get the neck and, well, the three components of the playing action, which is the neck relief, and then the first and the last fret actions all set, and then we're good to go. So I'm just looking for the ideal screwdriver bits. Got them here in ways that I can't actually get them with my big fat fingers. Okay, so now I just spotted this thing. I don't know what's going on there, do I? Well, this is the new camera work, you see. So I'm going to take off the back plate, and before I do anything else, I'll make sure that the tremolo the tremolo block is screwed all the way in. Now this guitar, we're going to set it up with the simplest tremolo usage, which is down only. Actually, that's pretty well set actually. Yeah, we're gonna set for down only, which means we just need when it's all done, we just need the strings and the springs just to be about equal, so that you can, when you play, the tremolo bridge plate is flat on the deck, but when you want to bend down, you can do so with the minimum of pushing. Now, Rich has got the original tremolo arm at home, but I bought another left-hander just to be, you know, in situations like this, I can then do what I'm doing without. This is very stiff at the moment, so we're going to need to balance that out later, but it's not a difficult job. The only time it gets a little more complicated is when we come to set a floating tremolo, which is much more fiddly. Now, okay, let's see if I can stand back for a minute. Well, I can't tell what I'm looking at, so here we are. So, in a sort of longish view of only the neck, but we can see what's going on from the overhead camera. So to get this down to where I want it, we have all three of these variables: the height of the last fret action, which is set by the saddles, the height of the first fret action, which is set by the nut slots, and the curvature in the neck, which is set by the truss rod in relation to how hard the strings are pulling on the neck. Those three things are interdependent, and so you can never just do one, then the other, then the third one, and get on with it. You have to make sure that you know how they're interacting with each other. So, and they do interact with each other. If you lower the action down at this end, then the action at the first fret gets lowered too. And all I can say is, when you're starting with something where two or more, at least one of the components, the three components, is grossly out, then you need to do the grossest one first. Now, what I'll do in this is I'll start with the last fret action, because it's quite. Actually, no, I'll check the relief first, but then I'll go on to the last fret action. So my first port of call is to hold down the A string on the first and the last fret simultaneously, and just check and see how much space is between the string at the midpoint of its travel. And that basically is using this string now as a ruler to measure the gap. And that tells me that it's very, very, well, not totally, but quite flat, but it's not in a bad place. So I'm not going to adjust it any further than that for now, unless sometime later on we need to. Now, the next thing I'm going to adjust is I'm going to come down this end. Again, I don't really have a very good view, so I should have a big mirror, and that would all be taken care of. So now I'm looking down at the bridge, and I can tell down here that the action over the last fret, as I measure it, is quite high. So I'm going to broadly bring that down to where I'd want it. Now this is where the close-up camera just gets a bit out of hand, because no matter what I do now, I'm going to have to pretend I think that's caught up with it. And I go, has it caught? Yeah, well, that's caught up with it, because I can see, but I'm constantly reaching for the mirror. Anyway, so I'm going to, I suppose I need to have these more or less under, not complete tension, but I need them a bit more under tension than not. Doesn't matter if they're not in tune right now. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my my string height gauge. Now this is running at 3mm, so we want half of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is dial these right down to half of that. Now I'm going to be prepared to come backwards from that, because if I make adjustments down at the other end, it's going to change things. Now if I want to start with kind of dialing in an advanced reduction at the nut end, so I think with the last fret action I could pretend to myself that I'm closer than before. If I can just get this capo to stay on, if I capo the strings at the first fret, that gives me a closer view. But again, it will still rise when I take the capo off anyway, because that's lower than I will have the first thread action. So we just have to bear in mind that this is never going to be exact until we've got these two end-to-end actions pretty much set. And then once we've got them set, we can fine-tune them. But you know, we're smart enough to know that they're interrelated, and that adjustment in one will cause an adjustment, or change the other. So now I'm looking for 1.5 millimeters on these wound strings just as the start point, and there actually will be a gradient across all the strings from 1.5 on the bass side to 1.2 on the treble side, and that will give me the sort of playing action that I like, and a lot of customers also like, which is a low and light playing action that has a number of benefits. Has a couple of drawbacks, but I'll come to them in a minute. The benefits are that they make the guitar incredibly easy to fret chords and notes at the nut end, or actually anywhere, but certainly at the nut end, and well, actually all over. And it also makes the makes fretting notes, any single notes anywhere, easier too. So it's having a low action is a very good thing, or can be a very good thing for a beginner. Now I've got these down to roughly where I want them, but he says now, dragging the camera willy-nilly back up to this end, I'll probably get to be able to guess exactly where it is on target very soon. I'll probably have like a white light line on the bench. Now what I want to do is now to get the strings, the first fret action down to close to where it should be. Now for this I need the strings to have some tension, and in a way a bit of creak going on when I wonder what's going on. Yeah, some creaking going on, but we'll worry about that a bit later. So I'm going to put this into tune, or close to tune. Now the reason I put those into tune is to keep the strings at fairly high tension over the nut. And the reason I want to do that is because as I cut down the slot, I want the strings not to kind of accidentally hang on the edge of something, or not go all the way down into the slot. I need them to go all the way down to be on at the right height. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to aim for a start action of 0.4 of a millimeter, and so I'm going to work outwards. I'm going to start with in this case the D, and work out across the bass strings. And to do it I'm going to use a V-notch file, and this is a file that I have used in this job a million times and it does a brilliant job of notching nuts for this purpose. Now some people who believe you have to spend an absolute ton of money on expensive Japanese nut files will kind of scream and have you think this is a Philistine way of doing things. Now I've done it both ways. I have got unbelievable numbers of Japanese nut files which I never use anymore because they are inefficient, and actually they end up creating more trouble. There's a long drawn out set of arguments about why they create more trouble, but one of them is quite simply that they end up, no matter how good they are and how good you are, they flex slightly and they end up making a wiggly channel rather than an absolutely dead straight line, and the wiggly channel ends up snaffling away the free, or the friction-free travel that you were trying to get, and you end up having to sand out with various grits of paper to clear and get yourself a friction-free movement of the strings again. Now, there is a better design than those Japanese ones. They're actually also Japanese, than the thin Japanese ones, and that's the Osco Files, which are stiffer, and actually what they end up doing is they end up making more of a V-notch, as I'm doing here. And the great thing about a V-notch, even though at this point in the game it looks ragged and can be quite off-putting to the cognoscenti, the good thing about a V-notch is that by definition it is always widening above the string. So at any point it's wider above any point you're looking at, which means it doesn't grip the string in anywhere near the same way as a straight-walled slot does. So it's kind of inherently a good shape to do. Now, I very often will cut the slots and use the V-notch file that I'm using here to get down to where I want to be. And when I finally get there, I will use one of my old sets of nut files to round out the bottom of the slot, so that basically the only one criticism I would make at using this approach would be that the bottom of the slot might be a little bit more pointy, sharp than the actual relative nut file. But if you round out the bottom with a nut file, then you're in the same place. So what I'm doing is I'm coming downwards to approximately the right height. Now, if you're looking at this thinking, but that's an ugly set of shark's teeth, dragon's teeth, you're right. Interestingly enough, they play perfectly well. And you really don't have to worry about them the way they look. But if you are worried about the way they look, then you'll see that the next thing I do is we will tidy up and take away all the excess material from this nut that we don't need. And in doing so, that will take away all of the dragon's tooth effect. So we'll end up with what just looks like a really nice low profile nut. Now, there is only one challenge about doing this activity with this file here, and you can notice I'm keeping it clean by declogging the Tusq material from the file as I'm between cuts. The danger is that if you get the angle of the V file a bit wrong, you can send, especially if you're going very deep into the material, you can sort of send the position of your slot off in a certain direction, sideways, which you don't want to do. But as long as you keep track of that, you'll be okay. Now, as you get down further into the nut, it can become at this point quite difficult to cut any further with these things, and you can either sort of press on, which sort of, you can see that as the more of this tool goes into the material, you're taking more and more each time, which can get a little bit clumsy because you can either go off in the wrong direction, or if you don't feel comfortable, then my recommendation would be to stop cutting at this point, and in a second take down all the excess and then do another round with the strings back in place, and that way you'll be fine tuning it and we can sort of get in with the nut files. So I'm going to do that exactly at that point. It's not quite there, but I'm just going to stop without going too deep with this, because as you see it's starting to get a deep slot going. Now I find that I've already marked up and made the initial nut slots, so now it's a matter of cutting them and making sure they stay straight, and I'm checking my 0.4. Now 0.4 is my conservative, safe insurance policy. It's a little bit, actually it's a fair bit under the minimum that you would have to go. Believe it or not, the minimum clearance is about 0.1, which is what you get roughly for a typically average setup guitar. It's about what you get when you put a capo on and you make the following fret into your new first fret. So the capo kind of sets the first fret action in a geometric sense. It says the first fret action now will be whatever it is as the strings run away up to the top of the bridge saddles. And usually you find that the clearance between the first fret capoed and the next fret tends to be about 0.1. You can put your finger on it now and measure it if you can get the feel it. The gauge is under there. So it's, and as you know, you have no problem playing with a capo, and it never sounds terrible. So a capoed string, a capoed first fret, for example, gives you string clearance of about a tenth of a millimeter. So I'm at the moment aiming for 0.4, which is 4 times as great. So that's a very safe margin. I'm starting at 0.4, but my usual sort of target is about 0.3 at the end. And that is well enough in the safe zone of not being ultra low like a capo, but it's also more than low enough to avoid the basic problems that you get when your first fret action is too high. And I haven't mentioned those, but that's the reason why we spend so much time and effort to get the right low first fret action. And that is that when the first fret action is higher than about 0.5 of a millimeter, and progressively so after that, what happens is that any note fretted down near the nut tends to play sharp. And so this is often experienced when you get a new guitar and you start playing it. You tuned it all up and it's all beautiful, and then you start to notice that your chords, your open chords particularly, sound horrible. Can't quite get them in tune. That's what your ear tells you. And you struggle and you spend time. You go back to your electronic tuner and you retune the guitar because your ears tell you that these chords aren't playing in tune. So you sort of, you immediately start by distrusting your ability to tune the guitar, which is sad really, because I've heard so many people describe it like that they thought it was their fault. So what it is, in fact, is it's the height of the string above the first fret. And if it's, say, if it's 0.5 or more, then you find that the notes will go sharp when you fret them, because you're basically having to push them so far to fret them on the, push the string so far down onto the fret that it basically tightens the string and makes it go sharp. And as a result, your note goes sharp. And this really shows up in open chords, because an open chord is one where let's say three of your notes, and if you take a D for example, it's a very good place you'll find this rearing its head. You'll find that the D string will be the 3 fretted notes in the D here will be sharp, right? You tune everything up perfectly, you press these down with your fingers. Because the first fret action is too high, i.e. the nut slots aren't cut far enough, these 3 notes will go sharp relative to these 3 notes, which will play open. And the resultant sound will be, these 3 will be in tune with each other, so will these 3, but the 2 sets of 3 will not be in tune with the other set of 3, and together they will make a pretty discordant, horrible sound. And that's one of the first problems you get with nut slots that aren't cut correctly and a first fret action that's too high. The other thing is pretty obvious, but it's worth saying, is that the other thing you'll notice is that a guitar like that, that's set like that, is incredibly difficult to play. And if you don't know any different, you might not know about it, until you've seen the opposite. So what I'm doing now, reducing it all, actually no, I'll put these in first. By taking the action, the first fret actions down, what you'll notice, if this had been Rich's guitar, but you'll notice it compared to other guitars he may have played, is that this new nut with the new low first fret actions will leave the guitar feeling a ton easier to play at this end. So making chords will just feel relatively effortless. So what I'm doing here, as you can see, is I'm filing away all of the excess material above where the strings sit. Now, yes, at this point, I'm very likely to crash into the strings, and that's not a problem. These are sacrificial strings. We're going to replace them with new ones at the end. But what I'm doing is just getting down as much of the wasted, excess, pointless, surplus nut material as possible. Now, obviously, we need a bit more at the base end because the strings are bigger and they can stick up more. When it comes down to the treble end, we're going to take away a lot of it, and we're going to end up with a nut that's quite low, or relatively low. Now, even though I've got to here, I'm still got a lot to do, so I can continue sanding this down, and I'm using rough sandpaper at this point in time. This is probably an 80 grit sandpaper, and it is, you know, I'm hitting the strings, so they're probably getting a bit of a shaving as well, which isn't a bad thing. Only bad if I cut through and they snap right at this point, because I could still do with them not snapping just yet. Now I'm leveling out to get a nice flat nut. Okay, so you can see that straight away we've taken quite a lot of material away. I'm still going to take more, because at this point I'm also going to come back in with the file and just continue down. Now I've moved a lot of the unnecessary material out of the way. I can now take it down to the sort of last final adjustment. Now again, this probably would make sense if I'm in tune or near to in tune. But what I will do is at the end, when we've got the height right, the first rate action I should say, I will continue sanding I'll continue sanding with the strings out, just to get it right as low as possible. Now, what you can have is, at this point, you can have your set of Japanese nut files. I'm trying to think of how we can look at interesting angles. There you go. Got some Japanese nut files ready. Not going to use them just yet, but we'll go back to the first three. Now we're in sort of sensitive, delicate area. Let's make our final target 0.3. Okay. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at the gauge and I'm seeing how much room is left. Now I'm going to go back in very carefully with the file, and I'm just going to make sure that cuts to the front, but really important to make sure that the slot is pointing downhill backwards towards the headstock. And we're very nearly there. So this is a time, because I've taken so much time to prepare a handmade nut, it really is a time to be very careful now with the fine tuning. So I'm going to only do a couple of little scrapes and stop. To me, that's just about on the mark. Now I'm going to get my my file for the right size. If I can remember where it is. Okay, it's this one. And there's some of that, 32. And I'm just going to round out the bottom of the slot with this file. Okay, now this really probably isn't cutting so much as it's just shaping the bottom of the slot. Beautiful. Okay, now I'm going to put the A back in and do the same. So I've still got a bit of distance to go, and there's still quite a bit of material to remove when the time is right. But again, it's very, very careful adjustments now. A little gap, but that's about right for me. So I get the next size file, and I'm going to do the rounding out business. kind of compressing the material, making sure that the very bottom of the slot is the right shape. And the final one is the low E. We've also got sharp edges here which we'll take off as well. Okay, so the low E, fair gap still. So now this one has this one's got quite a good cutting file, so I'm going to start with that one just as is. I won't use the V file for this one. I'm just going to go straight in with the Japanese nut file. I'll just be very careful. As I say, I haven't gone to all this trouble to get this right. I can't afford to overcut it right now. Still quite high actually. So it's a slow process. You've got to be patient with this. You can't rush it. I think I'll stop for now on there. But the payoff is fantastic. The feeling of, excuse me, the feeling of a well set up guitar is, and a one with the correct setting on the nut is absolutely wonderful. It's about getting this line, this slot just right. It's about taking the time to be precise. Now the thin ones I found don't cut Tusq so well. It's interesting, the thin Japanese file. Tusq is a plastic, and it's not only is it got fantastic self-lubricated PTFE qualities, what it also does is it's got very bouncy qualities for the same reason, I think. So your little nut file teeth tend to bounce off it, or they compress it a bit, but they don't really cut into it, probably because of its resistance to the friction. So when I do the come to this last stage, I'm conscious that I'm not really getting a lot of cutting power done with the Japanese files. I'm just doing it as a sort of, I don't know what the word would be, a formality to round it out, like I've said before, just to get it as smoothed out as possible. But I'm looking at this now and it's coming right in on the mark, which is great. Okay, so finally we've got the last one in the pile. This isn't far off as well, so I have to be very careful. Sorry, you won't be able to see that. Okay, almost there, and a little round out on this one, and I'm going to really call that done. Now we're also going to get rid of this and replace it with a black Tusq string tree, so we're giving this thing every possible chance in terms of its, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, its slipperiness, i.e. not friction. Okay, so that's great. Oh, let me just do one more thing. I'm just going to double check the last fret. Now you can't see me on the close up, I'm sorry about that. Somebody will complain. I'm just going back now to the last fret. Yeah, the last fret action. I'm just making final adjustments there. 1.5, 1.5, some friction up. nearly there. Now once I've got these three components, the neck relief, the first and last fret actions, and yeah, there's the three things, the neck relief and the first and the last fret actions, we're then ready to check the notes and level out any frets that need leveling. So I think that's about right. So let me get the pitch right again. Okay, so now here's the fun bit. Actually, what I haven't got is I haven't really got an ability to stand this up anywhere. If I had some other kind of, maybe if I had a hole in some wood, I could put this thing somewhere. But at the moment, I don't really have too many places it can go. But other than stand up on here, which is a bit ropey, and that's in the way. Let's move that. Let's see what you can see down there. I'm just looking for a longish shot so I can put it out of the way and not worry too much. Okay, he says looking in through the thing. Yeah, something like that. Okay, I'm just going to leave that there for a minute while I take care of a few things. Right, so we have now the right amount of neck relief. We've got the right last fret and now the right first fret action. Now the real question is, what are the frets like in terms of, are there any choking frets? Coffee is on cold, I'm wondering that. Now we're going to replace the tuners here as well, but we're also going to replace the three pickups. We're going to have an iron gear there and two Seymour Duncans in the neck position. Now, the fret slap. Okay. Okay, the first thing I can hear, and I know is happening, is that we've got what I call fret slap, and this is distinct from what I call fret buzz. And the reason I make a distinction might become obvious in a minute. Fret buzz, in my language, and it may not be the same language that everybody uses, okay? Like, for example, I measure the last fret action here as my guide. Other people don't, that's fine. Fret buzz is what I call when there's an uneven fret in the mix, a high fret or a low fret. A high fret will stand in the way, so when you fret a note, if the one in front is high, you won't have any clearance and the note will be dead or choked out or buzz. That is obviously why we do fret leveling, to get rid of the uneven frets. However, a high fret and a low fret do the same thing, which might sound a bit counterintuitive, but what I mean by that is a high fret is kind of obvious to conceptualize. You've got a whole set of frets that are more or less relatively even relative to each other, and then you've got one fret that sticks up, and so you can get your leveling tool, usually a flat tool in the case of conventional fret leveling, and you take down the high fret mostly down to the level of all the other frets, and then you've got them all relatively level, and that should solve the problem. That's fine, and that's what people level frets for, but very often the same problem is caused by a fret. Instead of it being high, it's low. And what it does is, because it's low, it makes the next one relatively high. So it has the same effect. You press and fret in the low bit. Because it's low down, the next one's relatively high relative to it, and that vital bit of clearance is gone, so it buzzes in the same way. Clearing up a low fret is trickier in some ways, because a low fret, you have to gently bring down all the others to bottom out the low fret, and that's costly. Well, it has to be a little bit more costly in fret metal, but there's no alternative. It sounds dramatic. It isn't as bad as it sounds. It's a lot less destructive than it sounds, but you have to, if you do this method, use this method, you have to be conscious or aware of the fact that very often, in fact more often than not, the action that's possible on your guitar is dictated not by the high frets, but by the lowest frets. And they can often be low because the fret itself has been banged in harder than any other, or the wood was a little bit softer there, or could even be there's a tiny dip in the fingerboard. And very often, along with there being individual one or more low frets in certain spots, you can find little clusters of them, which still have the effect of making the next higher, relatively high one, too high for the fret to work with. So fret buzz is usually found in certain spots, not all over. You'll kind of get instances of it, and that will usually be caused by high or a low fret, for which fret leveling is the first line of attack. The thing I said, I didn't hear any immediate fret buzz playing all these notes, which is great. Yamaha is usually good like that. But what I did find was quite a lot of fret slap. I'm just going to wash my hands a second. Fret slap, to use the other term I use, is a different thing. Fret slap I use to refer to when the string generally hasn't got enough room to spin. And now this would be because the action is too low, or the neck is slightly uneven generally. There are not any single frets standing up and choking off notes, but all together there's not quite enough room for the frets to move. And that you'll hear is that little buzzy sort of sound almost all the way up here. Now, years ago when I started doing this, I actually thought there wasn't an awful lot we could do about it. Fret buzz I understood that we could level down and get rid of, and that would solve a lot of the problems, or a lot of the barriers to having a low playing action. But I didn't really think that if we encountered fret slap, I didn't really think there was an awful lot we could do about it, and that ultimately when we got to that point, we had to really accept that the combination of the action at both ends and the flatness of the neck were a step too far for that neck, and we just have to back off a little bit. Now the amount we had to back off generally was tiny, so it wasn't really a problem. But I started to find over the years that in fact this truss rod banana, as I call it, tool actually helps with the fret slap problem as well. So it not only gets rid of the fret buzz, but it also gently kind of ekes out enough room. And I'll show you, now I can use this way around, I can show you a small drawing. I'll try and put you over here. Yeah. So let's say you've got your neck, which kind of looks a bit like this, right? That's not a bit of a wiggly curve, you can see. And what we do is we sample 3 points on that curve, right? Which are, as you can see, it's like a digital process. There's only 3 sample points. And then we bend our tool in a very smooth curve between those 3 points, right? Now the first thing you'll see from my little drawing there is actually the red line. The tool is actually smoother overall than the slightly wobbly fingerboard, fretboard, I should say, underneath. Fretboard, fingerboard, whatever. Okay, so what happens is, I've learned over time that these little ups and downs actually are what get in the way of the string spinning. And what happens is, because they push the frets up and down, and what happens is that this line here, our tool, comes down and takes away, or it sort of takes away the unevenness across the whole length caused by this undulation. and you can't see it with the eye, but the tool amazingly lets you know it. So that's something I've learned over time with this method that I've been amazed by, actually. I'm very pleased to find it's gone a lot longer, further towards taking care of that problem than I thought it was possible. So that's how I understand it works these days. So it's a double bonus. Okay, so at the moment, all I've done is I've set all the actions where I want them. I've tested all the individual notes, and the first thing I can tell you is there's quite a bit of fret slap on the bass strings, which is quite common. The bass strings move more, so they're the ones that will cause the fret slap quickest, especially on the flat neck with a low action. That's where there's not much room for the strings. What I haven't checked now is the problem that's also quite common now at a low action with a flat neck, and that is what happens when we bend. This isn't too bad. I can't do it with my... Wow, that's actually... That's not bad. Just, I mean, a tiny hint of it there, but... Good old Yamaha. Right, well, I have to give it credit to Yamaha. This is a very good set of frets. And that's where I do take my hat off to them. They have got fantastic at putting in frets, and it may even be, I'm looking at the tops of these frets, I think this has been leveled, actually, leveled and polished. I don't know whether you can see this. This could be where this camera comes into its own, you never know. Let's see if I can give you a feasible good look at the top of these frets. Kind of hell. Right, first of all, let's try the thing about keeping it still. Maybe. Let's try the thing about zooming in. Yikes. Yeah, okay. See those scratches on the top of the fret there? Right, I'll say dead center screen about now and upwards in a straight line. They're scratching across the top. Can you see? It's hard to keep this still. I'm very sorry about my shaking hands. I'm going to try and rest it for a minute upon the finish. Now it's saying you are too close. Forget it, chum. You ain't going to get it from there. I'm just trying my different things out. Now I've kind of lost the view and made it work really. Maybe you can see it there in the center screen. You see the scratches? See the scratches along there? You can see it. There you go. I would say that's been leveled. Now what I don't know, yeah, look at that. That's a pretty good indicator. See that? You do have to get in that close to see. So yeah, now what I don't know is whether the previous owner took this guitar and gave it a good leveling. Why not? They may well have done, and good for them if they did. Or it may be that Yamaha is doing it in the factory, in which case I'd say good for them if they did. So because of that, this guitar actually plays pretty well, perfectly. One thing it doesn't allow for is what I just explained, the second component here, the fret slap. So I am going to do the leveling purely on the basis that we're going to use it to just eke out that, that slight imperfection which is causing the fret slap. But I have to say that this will end up being one of the almost least necessary, to put it very clumsily, levelings, but you know, it's necessary from the point of view of that fret slap, because we'd have to raise the action if we didn't do it. But I think that's quite a good condition set of frets to begin with. So really, I'm not looking to I'm not having to free up any individual frets from choking out. Everything will play as well and better than it just did. And what I'm hoping is that this little bit of attention with very careful leveling will result in the fret slap clearing up to a point where it's very minimal. Okay, so now that's a sort of long shot. We've got loads of long shots and we never have any kind of close-ups of fret leveling. So let's see what we can see from here. Yeah, something like that. Right, so I've calibrated the tool. I'm too busy talking and I haven't put any marks on the fret. I need to cover the frets in marker pen. That's because I needed you to see the tops of the frets first. It's very hard to get in that close and see. I wear glasses, as you know, and so my eyes are okay with the glasses, pretty good with the glasses, but they're not perfect. You get to see a hell of a lot when you put the zoom on like that. And that actually revealed a lot more scratching that I couldn't see from this distance with my naked eye. But it's quite good detective-wise, because I have to say, you know, I talk like, oh, good on Yamaha, you know, their quality control means a perfect fret job, blah, blah. It's not really the case. It's almost impossible to get a perfect fret job. You have to level, and Yamaha knows that, or whoever had this guitar last, if it wasn't from the shop or the factory, knows that, hence why it's been leveled and you can see the telltale scratching on the top of the frets. So that stands as testament to what I've always said, and that is, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're not going to put on a set of frets and find that they're perfectly level without leveling. If I do it one in 30 times, I will consider myself extremely lucky. And you know, that's with all the preparation and effort and so on. Okay, now I'm going to take you off power because it's restricting my movement for a minute. Now I'm just going to take you along the diagnostic trail. Okay, so once you've done the first little work with the truss rod, the first thing you do is you take a little walk along and you go, okay, what's happening generally? Cut, a little bit of cut, so more at there, not much, none at all, right? Low fret. Remember I said low frets dictate often more than high frets? That one's cutting a little bit. Look at that. None. 3, no cut. Tiny bit. Fair amount. A little bit less. A bit more, same. Bit less. More. None. Okay, you see what's happening? Now, if you get an irregular pattern of frets cutting, first thing you do is you go, oh, that's interesting. It's not showing up marks, or it's not cutting in a, you know, across all of them. You'd think if I've calibrated this correctly, you think to yourself, this would be cutting evenly in all the places where the tool touches. So the first thing I do is I recalibrate to see, have I overbent this tool or have I underdone it? Now actually, in looking at it again, I've slightly underdone it, which means I'm now going to bend the truss rod a fraction more, right, so that it now will probably fit into that little dip you see right there. So that was a good call to recalibrate. Now it wasn't so far off that it makes much of a difference at all, but if I now drop this back onto here, we'll probably find that within a tiny bit of work it'll start cutting in this middle place. Now if it then doesn't, what it's going to tell us is, first of all, we had a little bit more calibration to do, and actually it's still a little tiny low spot there, but it's good to know because that will be affecting, that will be causing a problem. Now, interestingly enough, in the case of the fact that our biggest problem here was fret slap, in fact, these lower parts are probably the best bits. So what we really do want to do is take out the higher parts across the whole board in this operation, in order to make the whole bass strings, the 3 bass strings, work a little bit better than they did for this very low, and admittedly very low playing action. So what I'm doing is I'm just now using that curve, the idealized curve, over on top of the imperfect curve of the actual fingerboard to basically just give a tiny bit more space for the strings to work in, and I think that will be close to good. Right? So I don't know if it's possible for you to tell, but the first thing you can do is you can take that off. Sorry about the view for a minute. It's a little bit still. I'm just going to double check the playing action, because if I'm too low, it won't really make anything easy for anyone. No, it should be about right. I'm looking down the opposite way on this, so it should be about right. So I'm just going to go at that again a little bit. And again, we do have a very flat neck. I mean, if I just re-examine the relief on this neck, I'll put the capo on and just have a look. No, that's about right too. So we'll go again on the leveling again, just to attempt to free up that space and avoid a fret slap. One of the things that if you know that a neck or a set of frets have been leveled before, one of the things that you can be aware of straight away is that as you work the frets now, you're doing so on top of frets that have already been part leveled or part flattened. And this is something to be aware of, because very often when people do levelings like this, they don't, often in some factories they do fret leveling, which is a good idea, but they don't, those same factories don't often recrown the frets. They just polish them or buff them. So they leave the scratching in like you've seen, but they also leave the sort of flat spots in there as well. So what that means is, because they've shined it, they've buffed it out, and all you see is a shiny set of frets. When you look up close, you see the telltale scratching like we just did. And then the next thing that can happen is that as soon as you start leveling, like I'm doing now, you suddenly see flatter spots, and it can fool you into thinking you've just put a load of flat spots in that short time leveling with 400 grit. And actually, the chances are it isn't you. The chances are it's the result of the previous leveling. And so it's good to be aware of that. If the frets have never been leveled before, then often you'll find that it takes longer to cut what appear to be the flatter spots onto it. But yeah, I've had guitars that I've just started to touch with the file, and suddenly there's a great big flat expanse, and you're shocked for a second. You think you've just somehow miraculously done all of that, and in fact it's obvious. It becomes obvious that it's the result of a previous leveling just making itself apparent, and it's apparent because it hasn't been re-crowned. If it had been re-crowned, you wouldn't have a flat spot still on it. It would be, the fret will be returned to its original arch shape, which I'm going to do in a minute using the Pushback re-crowning tool. And the reason why it won't happen in some people's homes is that fret leveling is something that an owner can figure out how to do pretty easily, consulting Facebook, YouTube and stuff, but not a lot of owners will have a more expensive crowning tool. Little spot there. Yeah, so it's much rarer that they'll have that tool, and also there's a certain amount of time involved with it, and I suspect that if they're doing the leveling of factories, they'll probably do the main thing, which is to get it level, or to improve the levelness, which gives the user the chance to set a better playing action. And then I suspect they kind of push it out the door at that point, run it across the buffer, which takes about 5 minutes, and then out the door. And that is, if they only had 5 minutes to spend, then it's better they did that than nothing at all, because that at least gives the new owner a chance to lower the action a bit lower than the standard. that often the guitar will come with, which can be a disappointment. I mean, a classic disappointment, which I think, well, many big manufacturers were guilty of it, but I think you know, Harley Benton have in the past. I don't know about so much now, but Harley Benton were often guilty of chucking guitars out with high actions. And you know, like, you'd always get people defending them, saying, well, they're budget guitars, or well, they're setting them for the average, you know. And the truth is, you know, the truth is that the frets are what limit the height of the action that can be set almost universally. And so even a radius block level in the factory is better than not doing it at all, because it will give the person unboxing it quite a big range of, you know, improvement on the playing action. So why not? Let's recalibrate. Notice I'm recalibrating the thing every time I move across a track, as I call it. From E to E, I recalibrate to make sure that the tool is following the curvature of the neck as closely, sorry, not the curvature of the neck, I'll say the tool is following the curvature of these 3 points as closely as possible. Now, we may not be able to get every last bit of fret slap gone, but I think we've improved it quite a bit. I can see from all of this that this last fret in the whole series is without a doubt lower than all the others. And why that last fret should be so low is beyond me, but it is. Okay. Now I'm just going to go ahead on this one. Think about if you get in a situation where ultimately you've got some fret slap and you need to make an adjustment to cure it. The good thing is that the amount of upward adjustment you have to do on the action at the bridge end is so small that it's barely noticeable. That's the positive thing. You know, for me, it represents a annoyance, because I'm aiming for my target, and if I can't get to my target, then I'm a bit fed up. But I'm just going to go across these 3 bass strings one more time. But yeah, the amount of adjustment to improve it at the last fret action end is miniature. You can get a massive improvement for a very small adjustment. But I try to do what I can with the frets first. Okay, so now when I've got this done, the next thing I'll do is I'll take the strings off, I'll remark the frets, and then it'll be a matter of re-crowning them to get rid of the flat spots. Now, we're working here with 400 grit paper, and you've got to remember that the sanding game is always a game of reducing and removing the previous sanding marks. So you have to think your way through it. I'm starting with 400 grit on this. I'm actually going to go slightly backwards with the crowning tool, which is going to run 300 grit marks onto the frets, but mainly on the edges. So it'll still be mostly 400 grit along the tops of the frets. I'm then going to use 400 grit all over a couple of times to try and just blend everything in. Then I'm going to move to 600 grit and then carry on after 600 to 1000 followed by 1500. Now it might be smarter to get some 800 grit next time and intersperse another stage in there. It's hard to know whether, you know, if there's anything left at between 600 and 1000 that is of any significance. It's quite difficult to know without kind of studying it microscopically. But there probably is some sort of rule that I haven't found yet that says never jump more than 200 grit or something in any sanding process. I don't know what that rule is. Maybe somebody out here watching will know what that is. And if you do, then what you may be left with is a tiny bit of perceptible scratching left at the stage. And eventually what will happen is that scratching, it's quite curious because it'll eventually smooth out, but it will remain, and you can sometimes still feel it, even though the successive layers have softened it all off. Now what I'm doing now is I'm taking all the strings off. These could be stored for sacrificial purposes another time. The bridge is doing a lot of creaking, so I'm going to check the tremolo screws holding the bridge down. It may be that they're too far screwed on too hard, in which case we need to get them set right. But when the strings are off, I'm also going to now file down the remainder of the nut, get it down to as little as we can get away with to work effectively. And I'm going to replace the string tree with a Tusq one. After that, it will be time to crown the frets. Oh god, when I get these off, I'll have to stretch them out. Boring. I'll tell you what, I'll do those slightly separately. Let me walk you down to here. I'll put away these things out of the way. Not exactly tidy, but it's out of the way. What can you see? Right, come back down here. You're on batteries at the moment, so it's okay. Look at that. Right, so what I'm just going to check while I'm here is, not with that on, is what's happening with the screws here. This feels like that's too far down. That's probably why it was. You need, these tremolo screws need to be only in as far as they just touch the plate, but don't pull the plate downwards. And I think the far left-hand one was just pulling downwards, and that gives you a kind of an uneven twist in the way it pulls. Okay, so let's get on with the. Let's do a close-up because we can. So there we have the frets, beautifully leveled. Now that's a combination of what I've done and what was already done. So that at this point in time may look scary to you, but it's actually not much more than was already leveled on those frets. One of the things I didn't mention, and it's part of this whole equation, if I can just get this back to 1, there is a limit in all of this, and come on, will you go to 1? Thank you. There's a variable, I suppose you could call it. Remember I said the action is comprised of 3 principal things: the neck relief, the first and the last fret action. There is another factor in the whole of your playing action that is peculiar to you, and that's how hard you strum the strings. And the problem with this is, in a way, that bit of it sets what's possible across the whole thing. So the rule of it is that the harder you hit strings, the more they will move, the more energy you will impart to them, and the more they have to move as a result. So that means no matter what you're thinking about or what action you think you would like, ultimately a first constraint on what's possible will be how hard you hit the strings. And that's peculiar to you, and that's something I can't really even know up front. All I can do is try and set it for as low as is reasonable, as far as I can expect a sort of beginner player to play. But if it turns out that you happen to be a big hitter type player, then it may be that you have no option but to raise the playing action, or the last fret action of your strings, to accommodate your playing style. Or it may be that your playing style has to have a slight increase in the amount of curvature in the neck, which is what will also give your swinging strings a little bit more room. So it's typical that the sort of fast lead guitarist always wants what they call a shredder's neck, or shredding setup, which is flat neck, low action at both ends. You know, that's the sort of ideal action for for a sort of fast lead player who likes to shred, and also to contribute to all of that, a flat radius as well is typically certainly flat at one end, or maybe a compound. But so low and fast is what a shredder would like. But the problem is that an action that suits a shredder may well not suit somebody who hits big windmilling chords, you know, a Joe Strummer or a Pete Townsend. You know, it's just a constraint that you can't buck the system, I'm afraid. It's just how it is. It's just going to be that way. So I'm lowering the action. I'm setting the action, I suppose, for the lowest that this guitar could possibly do for the lightest shreddery type player. However, I think I have to give a caveat that when you get this guitar, if it turns out you didn't tell me that you are a big hitter and you're playing in a punk band or something, and you're going to be bashing this thing around all over stage with big handfuls of strum, then you will probably have to make some adjustments. Now, you could say, well, it will do you, well, it does me better to make sure as far as I can what style somebody plays with before I do this. And to most cases I try to do that. But there are some cases where when a guitar player is new to playing, it's not really a very meaningful question. They don't really know how to answer it. It's no fault of their own. It's just they don't really know yet how do I hit a guitar. Have you stopped beating your guitar yet? Type of question. Anyway, so you know, it's idealistic to think that everybody will know how they play and be able to supply me with how many newtons per square meter of force they strike the strings with, because they won't. So it just has to be an overarching caveat that says, if however you tend to be a heavy hitter, your strings will need more room, and this setup may not be able to provide that room. Therefore, if you play that way, using this setup, you will probably get what it will be. Actually, it will be fret slap. And to avoid that, you will need to raise your last fret action most of the time, and or increase the amount of curvature in the neck to accommodate that extra string movement. So it starts to get a bit difficult in some ways, because you start to think, well, hang on, if I have to say all these things, somebody wants, you know, they're sending me the guitar, they want me to set it up, and that's the end of it. They don't need me telling them stuff about different actions and having to do setups themselves or tweak the truss rod. That's what they sent it down for me to do, wasn't it? Well, yes, but unfortunately, the reality is I can't know every aspect, including, for example, look at that, another aspect, which is not uncommon, that I'll set a guitar up low and light, and it will go back to an environment that is warmer and more humid than I have here, just by virtue of what part of the country someone's in, or other country. And the neck on their guitar may change in response to those climate changes during transit, or when they arrive in the period after arrival. And that change, because I've set a very low light action as the customer wanted, that change actually can be enough to, because of the low light action, lose or cancel out the little bit of clearance that the action I set had, and that can be pretty disappointing for a customer who is expecting this low light action out of the box when they get it back from me, and they might plug it in and find that suddenly there's fret buzz or fret slap where they didn't expect it. And I think that does kind of go to hammer home the point that there is, you know, this is subject to a number of variables. Like I said, not the least of which is how hard you hit the strings yourself. Another one is the environmental conditions where you are, which can also lead to that small amount of clearance disappearing unhelpfully. So we have to sort of think of all of those. And more and more I've been planning and I've done one, but I'm going to remake it. I'm making a video to send on or send to customers that says something like, okay, you've had your guitar set up by me. However, it's very likely that your guitar is going to respond to environmental changes throughout the remainder of the year. And the only way you're going to be able to cope with that is to be comfortable making small adjustments. And whether somebody's kind of likes the idea of it or not, this means actually they're going to have to overcome their discomfort, bite the truss rod, as it were, and learn to make an adjustment and get comfortable with finding out what the truss rod does, and how it feels, how it changes the way it feels when you adjust it. And I think a lot of people, quite a few people I've known, have been reluctant to do that for kind of good reasons. You know, a lot of us were frightened away from doing it when we were starting out. You know, it all seemed very scary. We were kind of led to believe that we could do untold damage. And I think some of the guitar techs of the time were complicit in that. I think that it was in their interest to make us guitarists feel scared of going near the adjusty end of our truss rods. But it sets up a myth which doesn't do us any favours in the long run. And I think it's vital that I think it's just realistic to encourage people to get beyond that, so that they become comfortable in making adjustments. I just think you have to. There's no real way around it. So what I'm just going to do on this side is I'm just going to make a little bit of protection on here, because I'm going to use a device of some sandpaper to scrape this back flush with the edge. It's funny, one of the hardest things to do is to get this bit flush. The only way I've done it in the past is to get, I don't know where it's gone now. I had a piece of wood with, I haven't got it, but I'll make one. A piece of wood with some tape on it and a bit like this, but better. A piece of wood, a bit like that. Oh, here it is. Look, it's got someone in. Ta-da! I knew I'd made something up. I made it up. Look, he quickly checks. Can you see what he's doing? Ta-da! Yeah, it's funny. It seems to be one of the hardest things to do is to get this little bit. Sorry out there, long distance shot. One of the hardest things to do is to get this bit back to flush. So we're going to try this approach. So I can see as it begins to cut up the frog tape a little bit, we can afford that. I just don't mind it cutting the rosewood a little bit, and then I'm sort of coming in from there and just bending it over. There we go, that's good. Sand that out a bit later on. Okay, jolly good. That's our thing done. Right, so what I think I'm going to do now is the next thing we've got to do on all of this is sand out the neck. sand out the frets, and we've re-crowned them, which is great. I'm going to mask off the neck in order to protect the frets with masking tape. And I think I'm about to run out of this thin 3M stuff. I must have some more somewhere. If I can't find any more, I'm going to have to use wide stuff, which is a bit weird. So I'm going to mask all this off, but I'll do it off camera. While I'm off camera, I shall also take off. Should I do that now? Yeah, I can do the taping stuff off camera. Let's do the more interesting bit right now, right here, right now. Okay, here is the thing. Here is the thing, he said. He's still running. What are we going to do? Oh yeah, we're going to take all this out because we've got to take it over to the soldering bench. So let's remove the plastic. So you can just have a look under the hood, and then oh no, that's the wrong one. That's the pickup one. Oh. So either way, we'll reconvene over at the soldering station, getting ready to fit the new pickups to this. Now, one of the things I don't know about this configuration is the relationship between Seymour Duncans and iron gear. So we've got 2 Seymour Duncans and 1 iron gear. And if I don't get them right, what's possible is that I could get, I could put the single coils out of phase with the single coils out of phase with the humbucker, and that would then make a sort of thin, yucky sort of tone. So to avoid that, we'll need to be doubly careful to check from the outset that that isn't going to be the case. So just what I'm doing here is I'm just decoupling the tremolo wire and the jack socket wire, which should allow me to pull the whole of the electrics thing out. So G and B pickups somewhere in Korea, I think these were. Ceramic pickups here. So it's a pretty simple arrangement. Alpha mini pots, decent quality. But we'll take that across the way, and there's our swimming pool route. So with the camera off, I'm going to stretch these strings to get them back out and put them away as sacrificial strings, and then I'm going to mask off and sand out the frets. Do all of that off camera because it's boring, and the next time I'll see you will be over in the freshly tidied up snack bar stroke soldering department. But there's a look inside. Looks like they're after mouth of a fire in there, but very simple stuff, nothing hysterical about it. One thing I didn't check was whether the neck was on tightly. I've had quite a lot of movement recently in Pacifica necks. I don't know if it's particular to them, but yeah, there's a fair bit of movement in that one too. Anyway, all right, let's stop this. See you back over at time to solder. So time to switch you off there, down a bit to there. Well, there we go. So right, yeah, it's time to uncouple and put in the new electronics for this Pacifica. We've got the neck pickup there. So we're replacing the stock Aitken and Waterman, no, the stock Yamahas, which interestingly don't use the edge of the bobbin for their little tie-on business. They go straight into the coil, which is, I guess, a much safer, well, probably a safer way of doing things. So what we're going to do is we're going to unhook the various bits and pieces, and I can never quite remember. Some people know this. For some people, this stuff works really simply, and they know that the bridge pickup or the neck pickup where it goes into the switch, and I forget every time. So I'm going to just remind myself that this one here is the neck, and that's what I need to do to keep my sanity. Sanity. And I'm going to cut these lot off, twink, and I'm going to cut this wonderful great chunk of whatever that stuff is. You know what it is. It's ground wire. And then we're going to remove the various bits. Now that's out. Well, it's not out. We need to cut it off here. Let's cut this excess bit off, and then that all will come apart separately. So the switching over business on this is not that complicated, in that we've got to get the new pickups in, get them tidied up into place. There's a very small amount of room in these Pacificas to get the wiring through, and it's basically alongside the, you've got to go in alongside the this great big anchoring fitting screw thing. So just slightly the wrong size. We'll go with a bigger one. Yeah, so there's a little tiny gap to get the wires through, and it's a bit of a pain in the, what's it? Oh, I realised I've put this on without a battery, so we just need to keep an eye on the iPhone. Okay, neck, middle, it's pretty straightforward. The middle has is the yellow, and out comes the bridge. Yeah, so the main challenge really is making sure that you get these together in the right in-phase way. Now, I should have done some research on this, but I can never researched and found out what the simple way of checking whether two pickups that you have together in a setup are in or out of phase, other than to run them together. And when you run them together, they cancel each other's frequencies out, and they produce a very very thin sound, relatively thin sound. So that's all our bits. So that's what we're left with, a very small, thin, sad looking plate with, you know, an alpha, but an inexpensive, what do you call it, Chinese switch. Actually, this is Indonesia, but the components will be Chinese. This is made in Indonesia. Yeah, so small size pots. There's our output to the jack socket, which I think we can still reuse that one. That is out to the claw. I might replace that one with a slightly longer one. No real reason to do it. And everything else looks pretty bog standard. There's the output from the switch to the pickup. And it's left-handed, so it goes in the opposite side to what a right-hander's version would be. Now, a couple of quick things. We need this. We need a bit of the old cleaning up stuff, and I think I might actually run my secondary soldering iron. Now, the reason for that is I want to get heat to the pot tops pretty quickly, and my soldering iron there seems to do the stuff like lugs and switch lugs and stuff like that, pot lugs and switch lugs, very well, but it doesn't seem to like to shift a lot of heat onto the pots. So I will run my other one at the same time so we can get that bit done without any panic. Now, what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to, oh, I hate these. Did I say I hate how much I hate these PVC cables? Oh Lord, they're terrible. Give me silicone any day. I'm still looking for the ideal silicone wired soldering iron. But so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove these original wires, and in a minute I'm going to clear the lugs. I just soak out the original of the solder that was holding things in place. Just to give me a clean, fresh start at putting wires through. It just makes things a bit easier if I can. One. I've got my, where's my helping arms hands? There they are, hidden out of the way for a minute. Okay, there's two. And geez, I hate this PVC. It is rubbish. It bends in completely the wrong direction. Okay, so this is the that's the lugs cleaned up. Now I said that I was going to, let's remove this one take it off. It's a rigid sort of wire, and I'm not a fan of it, so I'm going to get a flexible wire for the tremolo claw. I'm spoiled. I think when I first discovered this lovely soft silicone wire, I was in heaven, and I've been there ever since, and refusing to compromise, which is why I bought 2 complete sets of it before I even ran out the first set, because I just wanted to be ahead of the game when it comes to wonderful soft hookup wires. And I can't tell you how good it feels to have an extra set of hookup wires kicking around, luxuriating in the box, waiting till the future when I need them. My little helper hands. How well do they look on here? Can you see them? Yeah, you can see them. I had a look at some of the footage from yesterday, and I quite like the new close-up type of thing, so I'm going to stick with that, or stick with doing it this way, giving myself a sort of movable close-up camera, being the iPhone. Okay, so there's my what am I calling it? The wire that goes to the jack. Now, when we put let's just leave it to one side for a minute. We're going to end up putting a whole load of pickup earths on here, so I think we're going to need to get this lot off. Now, here's my heated up spare soldering iron, so I'm just going to see if it's yet got hot enough to remove all of this in one go. It's looking good. Now we can nearly, it's got a little bit of way to go, but there you go, enough to get that off. Now I've got a place to put it, which is there. That looks safe at the moment. Okay, so I'm ready, sort of ready. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in each of these pickups first. What did we say this one was? We said neck, and this is middle. I think they're exactly the same pickup, so I'm not really too worried. Now, 2 wire pickups, obviously, so there's nothing too complicated about it. We will fit this one to the middle, and then we will make the black wire the ground, and we will make the oh, how odd. How strange. They put the thing on upside down. Oh, had me oddly confused. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I need to just wipe that down in a minute. Yeah, SSL. Yeah, so it's middle or neck. It doesn't mind. In fact, I think it's any position on a strap. So I chose these pickups partly because they had no left or right hand stagger built into them, so there wasn't any issue of that. And the Pacifica is a modern radius type of beast anyway, so it doesn't really need, it doesn't benefit from this vintage stagger type of malarkey. Because there obviously are left-handed pickups for some strap pickups, particularly the ones that are staggered, because they have a very careful and deliberate stagger in a particular direction, and to have a left-handed version you've got to have the stagger going in the other way. But these are universal, or they're flat across all the poles, so it means we can use them in any position. Now, one of the things I could do, and I'm not really, I don't think this will tell me, I'm not that clever enough to know how to, I think I can just about figure out how to tell when when 2 pickups are out of phase with each other. Let me think now. Is it out of phase? Is it even out of phase? No, it's not out of phase. It's reverse polarity. I can tell that by holding them together and testing whether they attract. So it tells me about the polarity of the magnet, but I don't think this is the same deal here, so I don't think that's going to help us in any way. So I think I'm going to have to put them all in, and then we're going to have to do the checking of the tones. And I think we should be able to tell by the output, or the resistance, that's probably a better way of putting it. I think we should be able to tell. So here are my single coils in place. And the first thing I'll probably want to do, well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tidy them up with some of these things, these little cable ties. So I'm going to get one of them down here just below the mark. Now this has got a big cavity, pickup cavity, a big swimming pool cavity. So we're not sort of tight for room at this point, but it's handy to have these tidied together like this to stop them wandering off in different directions. But then what we're going to do is we're going to cut these to a reasonable length. So they're going to come down here and they're going to go across that point there, and they're going to go up to basically to there. So they're not really going to need to be any longer than this. So the first thing we're going to do is cut them down in size, because there's no point carrying all of this extra material around. And if we do, we stand a very good chance of not being able to close the close the plate. That's probably more than I need anyway, but it's okay, we'll live with it. So here's iron gear with the rolling mill, and we get yet another, I mean, what is this? This is about 1.5 millimeters thick pickup. I mean, 1.2, and it's made of sort of porous feeling plastic. Don't like it, iron gear, sorry. They keep giving them away and they keep going in the bin or getting cut up for use in other things. Now with the iron gear, this is the only issue we've got now is the polarity. And I suppose if I was smart I would have written this down somewhere long ago, but I can't remember the interaction of the iron gear polarities with the Seymour Duncan. So it's sort of anyone's guess really. But I think the best way is we'll hook it up, we'll connect it up, and then we'll put the output to a meter, and we'll check and see what the resistance looks like. Now the single coil sitting on these rubber, these wonderful rubber vintage springs, makes the business so much easier than what I'm about to do now, which is trying to push against the push the spring and the screw against a hole that is blocked up a bit and is a smaller size. So now I've got to do this with spare hand. Look at this, out fall the screws. Yeah, to try and get this to bite is pretty nigh on impossible. It's a very fiddly and old, clumsy, old-fashioned thing. So you can't really see this with the camera, I'm afraid, but because I'm right-handed, I'm doing this right-handed. Somehow you have to line these two up. So one, you're pushing against the spring and you're trying to hold the two together so that this now bites into the metal and hangs yonder pickup, which it does. So of course, the wire, because these are effectively right-handed pickups, the wire's coming out the wrong side on the humbucker. But again, it's not going to be a problem. Okay, so back down to there. What can we see? Yes, we can see. Now we have got bit of a ton of excess wire here, as is always the case, and we're going to have to bring this along there and across there. So I'm going to do another thing. I wish I had slightly smaller ones of these. I probably have somewhere. I'm going to bring together these little cluster here like this to sort of help them turn a corner and to keep the bridge one in place, like that. Looks about all right. So now we've got that sort of hidden underneath its own footprint, which is okay. Now we've got, we know where the neck one is going, which is, neck one is this one. The neck one is going, follow this wire, and it's going to go to the top of there. And these are so-called pushback wires, so I can push the wire back like that. And if I want to, I can just kink it up at this end here, so it stay in place without moving anywhere. Really need to do that, but it just sort of holds it in the spot. Okay, so I'll get, I've still got my extra old-fashioned cheap soldering iron on the go. That's safely out of the way for a minute. We'll use it any second now. Okay, that's the neck pickup in place, or at least the hot wire, the hot signal from the neck. This next one here is the hot signal from the middle. We'll just double check that, yeah. And we'll just push that back. Oh, he said. It'll do it if it wants to. Just long enough to get it hooked up. The reason I'm just tipping it up at the end is partly to get it just to stay there, but also it makes it a little bit easier to cut the excess off. I'll just trim it back when it's done. Okay, that's the middle hot signal done. Trimmed back. Now we're going to put in the bridge one. And in the case of these fellas, I'll just double check. I think we've got red for the hot, for the iron gear. Now this doesn't follow the pattern. Let's have a look. Bridge pickup. Ground is black. Yeah. So red is the signal. So now we've got this huge long thing. But before we do that, what we're going to do is just trim back a little bit of the wire on. Actually, we don't need hardly any of this wire. It can come to about here. Let's just get rid of all the excess material that we really aren't going to need. But in this one, I will cut it back a little bit, if I can sort of cut and spin the wire at the same time. This is what I prefer to use, some sort of manual stripping. You've got to be very careful because you can crimp, or not crimp, you can score the wire underneath, and the result is it can break. But this gives me quite a nice lot of wire to bend together, load up with some solder and get it onto the pot top. Now we're going to also combine it with this one here, but in doing so we've also got to be able to get across to the red one across to this one here. So that will go. They usually make enough, but the challenge with this is, we'll leave those black ones out of it for a minute. The challenge is we've got this load of extra wire here, which is, I would personally, if it was my guitar, I'd cut it off, but I'm conscious that sometimes people, want to keep the original wiring, the length of wire on, because they want to resell. Now, what I'm trying to do at this point is I'm trying to find a way of doubling this back so I can minimize the amount of excess wire floating about. Come on. And then I'm going to attempt to clamp that, what's the word, cable tie that, so that we can get this bit tidied up. And the reason I want this tidied up is I want it to go through that little gap and into the electric cavity without any trouble at all, because if we aren't careful, it becomes impossible to shut this stupid cavity. And the reason it becomes impossible is because the little gap that the Pacifica gives you is so tiny that it's just all too easy for it to get stuck to one side or other of the little gap. Now you can sort of do it that way, which is one way of getting it to stay. There's no reason why it can't sit over the screw like that, which I'm going to do to keep it organized, and that way I know that it's dead on the line of the gap, so it will go through there. Can you see that? It'll go through that gap. I know the gap is exactly there, so just putting it on there and then tying the cable tie gets it to stay in place. And now what I've got is I've got enough room to get to the hot lug there, and I've got enough room to get to the ground as well. Now these things come with 2 wires, which are earth in this case, and if you're using the pickup without extra switching, then you can put all of these together, those two grounds together, of these two on this pickup together. If you're doing some switching and doing clever things, you have to keep these two separate. But that is not the case here. Here we have the coil split pair, which are redundant in this case. Now, a slight kind of challenge here is we still don't want this to stick up miles out the way. So we're just going to have a look and see if, with the help of yet one more of these little fellas, cable ties, can we just tag this thing back? And in a way, it doesn't matter how many ties you put in, as long as you contain these wires so that they are where you want them. So I'm just kind of holding that loose because I want that to go to there, and I'm going to get it, just, sorry if you can't see this very well, I'm just getting the what's that word I'm looking for, the ground, the bridge pickup positive hot signal, getting it to the lug of the switch. Now the problem is it for my liking it's a bit too tight thing. It's not got enough room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to put this thing down where it's a little bit more room, while still doing it right. That's a little tight, but it will do. It'll do. It's not going to move anywhere, and that's sitting up okay. So now I'm going to solder on the bridge hot, or the bridge positive, whatever you like to call it. Plenty good grip there. Now what I'm obviously going to do at this point is be very careful not to move anything now beyond what needs moving. So we know we've got 2 earths, grounds to come over here, and I'm going to twist them together. I'm going to treat them separately at the moment from the other. I could sort of combine them with the neck pickup grounds, but actually that's too much, too complicated, and there's no absolute need to do it. There's no need to get that complicated and stress the wires out. So I'm just going to load them up for now with a great big blob of solder, which means I should have no problem now pushing these down onto the top of the pot. I'll get these guys out of the way for a minute. So now over these come, and obviously I want to get these to stick on. Oh my god, this is getting hot. Stick on here without stretching anything else, because we've got enough stretch going on with that neck bridge pickup hot. Okay, so that's beautifully done. Poof, held in place there, gorgeous. I'm going to hold this there for 5 more seconds, just while I do these two. Just wrap these around each other, get a bit of thing there. We'll put some solder onto it there, and we'll get ready to stay out of the way. Thank you. Again, we'll bring this down onto here, and actually we could probably be a little cute and run that under there, so it just again borrows from everything else. We'll bring it up onto there and put it down on there, so we get a sort of as tidy an arrangement as possible. Now I'm going to hold this end of this, and I'm going to use our Draper 1,000,000 degrees Icelandic volcano of a soldering iron. It's actually starting to melt everything it's touching because it's so damn hot. Down you go. Everything melted. Beautiful. Yeah, it's getting too hot. So that is now going to get switched off. Yep. That's the main thing done. Right, so now we've got quite a tidy little arrangement there, if you can see. Quite a stretch, but it's no problem at all. It's everything's taut, everything's staying where it is, and once we place it in the cavity, nothing's going to move. This is quite a solid little arrangement. I mean, sometimes the only downside of what happens when you do things like this is that the arrangement of the wires underneath can cause they can put a bit of push on the scratch plate to make it go one way or another, but it looks okay. So now we'll push these little spare lines back into space, and we've got one more to add, which is the ground wire, the claw ground. Now, I was going to say I could add this, probably just need this on a bit more. I don't want to add it to that pot. I've heated that up enough as it is. I'm going to do it to this pot here. There's no reason why we can't take it off here. It'll just come back through. We could do it on here. Let's try it on the edge of this pot. I don't want to go put a ton more heat on the very top. Let's just try it on there. Try it on. Oh Christ. See, that's what happens is you're putting force into it and it goes for a skid. So it's not wanting to play now. Because I can't really grip this stupid soldering iron. Okay, done. Okay, switch that melting supercharged one off. Okay, so that's there going out to the claw. Right, so that's that done as a rewire. We've still got to take care of this bit, and we will in a minute need to bring the guitar to here, so we'll have to do a little bit of a clean up. So at this point in time, we're all going to just grab an old of the jack. It's not the best arrangement in the world, but so the idea at this point will be to clean up. I don't know how well I can't see what is visible at this point. I'm just going to go to the old lugs and try and clean up the holes so we can refit. And what I'll do before we get the guitar body across here and solder the bits back together, what I'll do is I will that didn't work. This is a pretty crude system, this let's kind of it this way. This suction business, it's kind of best we've got, but it's pretty crude, and these tools only cost about £2 or £3 each time, and they rarely last very long. They fall apart and then they don't really do any suction very well. Okay, so that's the jack socket cleaned up. Now what I'm just going to do here is, before we get the guitar down, check that's ready to go. This now needs a little bit of work. Now we've taken it off there. We can go through all the way up to there and through in there, so we don't need to strip back any further. We just need to strip back this white or the hot lead just a tiny little bit. Now sometimes when you've cut it, the lead really doesn't want to strip, because the cut bit sometimes prevents you from stripping it, but in this case that did all right. So before I do anything else, I'll put a tiny bit of tin on there, solder, and I'll do a little bit of a whiz around to clear. Look at these stupid cable on this soldering iron. It's just a joke, man. Slam. Okay, so there's my main bit ready to reconnect. Obviously I can't reconnect this until we've got the rest in the guitar. So I'm going to start by ditching. I'll keep these plastic containers because they're very handy for, and in one case we'll keep one to put the this humbucker, the Yamaha humbucker in, that you never know, might come in handy for Rich sometime. The question about these is, you know, Rich asked me this question today, is you know, are these significantly, or are they, will he notice a difference, or will it be tangible? And I think that it's hard to say, because if you've not really been used to the guitar, or haven't had it long, or played it much, or whatever, or you don't have a lot, thank you, a lot of experience, assessing pickups is quite a subjective thing. Actually, it's subjective whether you've got years of experience or not. It is by default a subjective thing. So quite difficult to say to somebody, actually I'll keep 2 of these for single coils together. Yeah, so it's subjective. That's the main thing about it, right? And as a result, you can, you know, it can be really affected by things you wouldn't expect. So, for example, if you're in a good mood today, and then pickups will always sound better than if you're feeling a bit low and having a harassed day, and so on. So, how a pickup sounds is affected by your mood. It's affected by, you know, whether you're cold that day or hot, or you know, whatever. Okay, so I think I've mixed 2 types of boxes here, which ain't going to help me much, is it? Anyway, and then because it's sound based, it's by definition it's subjective. We all hear differently, and we all have different tastes. So the minute you have all of that sort of variation in the mix, it's very, very difficult to say anything objective about pickups. So all I can say about the Seymour Duncans is, in my experience, again, my subjective experience, they tend to be, I found them to be good quality, well made, good sounding pickups, and that's about all I can say authoritatively. That's all I would say authoritatively about it. You know, it seems to me that's as good a reason as any for buying some. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of the leftover stuff here and close the decks, because we're going to bring the guitar back over to connect it up. Or actually, before we bring the guitar over, we'll do the test, or try and check for the polarity. Keep that pushback wire. I don't really know why, because I don't actually use it anymore. I go straight for the silicon based wire. But there we are. Now let's get my test cables up. Let's see if we can, first of all, we can do 2 things. We can see if we can hear the difference and make a judgment on the on whether or not the bridge pickup is in or out of phase with the neck pickups. That's the first consideration. That's the first sort of question I'm asking. So what I'll do, so we can either test it, we can try checking it by what's the word, resistance, and see if we can detect it, or we can try and check it via by sound. Sorry, I'm thinking on my feet badly. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I put it into bridge position for a start, and I'm just going to try, just leave that there, and I'm just going to try and see if on my meter I can read a resistance for the bridge pickup. Okay, so the rolling mill is giving me 845 k ohms. Now, if I push it to a mixture between the bridge and the middle, if it was in phase, you'd sort of expect it to be, well, let's put it to the middle first, and let's see what the resistance on the Seymour Duncan is 6. So the 2 of them together, I think you'd expect them to be, what, an average of those 2? So that's a 4.8. Is that what we'd expect? Now, how would I know? Let's put these 2 together. Oh, why is nothing coming out from there? There it is. Come on. That's because I'm touching the wires together. So that's the neck and the middle. Okay, so the neck and the middle together, they reduce the resistance. Okay, so 6 and then the pair, because they are in what? Series 3.8. So that sort of looks like it's correct. Okay. I could possibly got a chart here, but let's try and do it by ear. I probably have a chart that might just tell us this anyway, or can get one online. It will tell us how the colour codes of Seymour Duncan relate to iron gear, but let's see if we can hear it with our own eyes. Okay, so here's my little wiry things. Now what I'm going to need for this is the red, which is the hot. We'll use the white for the ground. And we'll prop this up somewhere where it will stay. And then not a lot of room here, so we'll spread them as far in opposite directions as possible. Ground here. Hot here. We should be touching. And then we'll put this on. Let's get the tuning fork as the sound source, wherever it's gone. So judging by the way the resistance changed, I suspect this will already by default be in phase. Let's see if we can hear the result of this. Now this is the humbucker, tone fully open, volume fully open. That's the bridge and the humbucker together. That wasn't that much of a loss of volume, was it? Well, that's because I wasn't between the two of them, idiot. I think that's in phase. We'll know in a minute when I string it up. If it isn't in phase, then the downside is I will be back to the soldering bench to switch around the wires. And it's not a difficult process, but it's a pain if you've already closed up the patient. So it's good to know in front. And if we really wanted to minimize the chances of doing something twice, sorry, that was probably a crap view because I'm not even thinking about the view at this point in time. If we want to do a check, let's get some email thing up here a minute. So Google. Let's go to pick up wiring comparison color codes. Pick up wiring color codes, and then in the images department you tend to have a great big long list. Get this bigger version. I don't know how well you can see that. We go Seymour Duncan, we know what they are. And we go to all of these, and it doesn't say, it doesn't have iron gear. Okay, let's try Seymour Duncan, Duncan, Iron Maiden, iron gear versus iron gear. Wiring, let's find some wiring. Right, that's not really. Let's try another way of writing it. Hold on a second. Iron gear, Seymour Duncan, double dingbat. That's very helpful. Seymour Duncan, wire color, wiring, wire colors, wire colors composition, that's not the right word. Compared, that'll do. No, that's the wrong word. What the hell? No, get away, you advert. Piece of crap. pickup wire wiring colours compared. Oh yeah. Okay, let's have a look. Have we got one with iron gear? Tone Rider. Oh god, Seymour Duncan, iron gear. Okay, thanks. Right, so will this help me? Stay here. No, it won't tell me. It won't really help me, will it? North Star is the red and green. Right, it's Seymour Duncan single coils. So I'm not comparing like, no, it doesn't tell me. It's not comparing like for like. I think my readings, my resistance readings and my ears told me what was going on there better than comparing humbuckers, which of course this isn't two humbuckers, it's single coil. But the issue of polarity still applies. So that what we'll find a little bit down the line is if we get this wrong, if I judged that wrong, then what we'll notice is that when I put the select the combination of the bridge pickup and middle, it'll give you an out of phase scooped sound, which isn't fantastic, and that will be because the polarity on the pickups is opposed to each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push through the claw thingy there, and I'm going to now try, where the hell is the hole? I'm going to try and get this slightly gnarled looking. I may need to add a longer wire to this, because I tell you what, I don't think for the life of me I'm going to get this thing to go through. It's too bent and gnarly. Bent and gnarly. It's a guitar brand. I mean, let's try and go in there. I can't even see the hole in this light. This is ridiculous. There we go. Yeah, this would be like absolutely marginal. Yeah, we'll get it through. Well, that's okay, but now I've got a problem because this isn't far enough through. This is getting caught. So pull that out of the way, try and get that through. Now this is the point where I hope that all my clever wiring gets through without getting caught on anything, and it's getting caught somewhere already. And there it is, it's the blue wire. My clever wire, blue wire, is getting caught on this little, it's the worst bit of routing. I won't take time to show you now, but it is the worst design piece of routing on any guitar I've seen. It's like a what a word would be, a pinch point. It's absolutely guaranteed to get you stuck. And what it does is, I think it's doing it even still, it's catching a tiny bit of wire in that corner there and floating it on there. Or it could be that it's on the other side. I don't think it's on the other side. I've just got to make sure this bit of wire is out of trouble, which of course I've got no control over it once it's hidden under here. So I'm going to there's a little bit of springiness, and I don't know exactly why that is, but it's not so much as to cause a problem. So I'm going to just tack it down for a minute with screws that live here, and we'll just kind of reevaluate once these are all in. Fine. It doesn't matter if it's got a little bit of a spring and something's interacting with the spring here. It's not a problem. It's if it stops it from sitting flat and the whole thing's buckling. That's the problem. This one here is showing me that it's touching. Now it was touching something, stopping it going all the way down, but that's okay now as well. So there we have our, I don't know what you can see, I'm very sorry. I'm so sorry. There we are-ish. We have our Seymour Duncans in place, our new Seymour Duncans in place with the iron gear, and we are ready to hook up the jack and the tremolo claw. And once that's done, it'll be on with a set of 9s, and actually we'll sit around. It'll be traveling back home to Rich next Monday, a week today. So I'm just finishing it because I don't like to sort of stop for too long in the middle of a build or finish or a setup. So I'd like to get it done, and I'd be happier if it sat at home ready to go in a case, ready to pack and so on, rather than it being sitting in the workshop waiting to be finished. Okay, so that's good. Although Rich originally wanted a red scratch plate, and originally ideally would have had black Seymour Duncan covers. The good thing about a black and white finish like this is that you can get away with black and white components. None of them look bad, which is quite a nice thing. So I don't have a lot of room here, which is good in one way, bad in another. It's good that I don't have a lot of wire to push back in there when it's finished, but it's bad in that I don't have a lot of access to get in there and do the soldering. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is hook up the I'm going to need my arm. Hook up the ground wire. The problem with this is, you can see with my little helping hands, is they want to jump upwards. They don't want to bend down that low for this job. So I've got to get this in such a way that with the ground in place, I've got access to the, this isn't going to be any use, got access to the hot. So at this point, I'm going to do a bit of tweaking and pulling around to get it through, and then probably a little bit of a, if I can, a little bit of a bend round to get it to stay where I want it to stay, like that. Okay, so that's sort of enough to get both of them on without any pressure, and I think that will do me. I could probably try and pull a bit tighter on the ground side. And I'm just going to double check, because I often get this so wrong. It's a 50% chance. You can only get it one way or the other, and so many times I've got this bit back to front because there are so few ways of doing it. I choose to do it the wrong way. So it's definitely, the live is going to the live lug, and the ground is definitely here going to the central sheath, whatever it's called. So I'm kind of happy about that. That's all good. And that's that. So there's a tiny bit of extra on the back side of this, which I could probably just trim back like that. And then I've got 2 black screws in here. And after this, I'm going to stop, tidy up the workbench ready, and then what I'll do is I will come back for the grand fitting new strings, testing the intonation. This is not easy at this kind of low down angle. I'll tell you. Now, one of the things about this guitar, and I'm just conscious, I found in the past, when you have a tight jack plug socket, as in not a lot of room in it, you can sometimes get the electrics touching out. which is quite surprising because you don't want that to happen. And they shouldn't do anything. It shouldn't be like an electrical contact, because usually it's only a finish, meaning it's not there's nothing. It's not like it's painted with conductive paint or anything. But in the past, I found that when it even touches, sometimes even the standard finish, I've noticed that it can cause a short, which is an absolute pain. So I'm sort of many times in the past I've gone and had to put a piece of tape in there to shield off or to isolate off, so we don't have that happen. Now there's a bit too much wire on there. I've probably put a bit too much on, but that's okay. We'll just tuck it out of the way. Now try to get some heat through into the claw just to get this attached. That should be fine. Okie dokie. Now I'm going to leave this here for a minute, because I'm going to need to come back and adjust those just at the last minute as we get the tremolo set to play. I'm going to stop the video, come back when we're in the restringing department. So here we are, ready to, let's just check the camera view, by the way. Oh yes, nice mid shot of the guitar. We're ready to restring. We've got everything done. Let's do a reality check. What did we do? Well, we changed the pickups just now. Refitted all new pickups. We have connected ground wire to the claw. We have refitted the jack, all good. I'm now oiling the fingerboard as we speak, ready for stringing. We're going to string with some Fender 9s. After that, I'm going to stretch out the strings, and then I'm going to check the intonation and set it. I think from before it was spot on, but we'll double check it. And then what I'll do is I will, last thing is just set the tremolo to a down only operation, which just really means, in the case of down only, it just means making sure that the spring loading is just set just back of where it needs to be, so that you can operate the tremolo downwards without too much force. So it's nice and light, but you can bend strings as well, and the tremolo doesn't move too much. So let's go. And then once all of that's done, then the very final kind of thing will be a quick once over with the dusters and whatnot. I tightened up the, what am I looking at here? Yeah, I tightened up the neck screws a bit as well. The neck was a bit loose. I just give it a little turn. So I'm just pulling through. Sorry about the view if it's not good. Just getting used to these camera positions. It's probably too close now, but so I'm getting all the strings loaded up first, and then we'll put them on. Now, with these locking tuners, like I said before, on this guitar, maybe on many others, do not go all the way through and just rely on the clamping power, the harsh, blunt clamping power of the locking tuners. I know that's what they're designed for, right? And that's why people want them, because in a sense that looks to be like a nice simple way of not having to do too much work. I mean, after all, what's the point in having them if you still have to wind something around the post? Well, that may be true, but I have to say to you that I would not, for a number of reasons that I've seen already, I would not trust the locking, the crimping part, the locking mechanism, to be the thing that holds the strings, because in order to have it on tight enough to hold the strings, you are actually going to damage the string, and it will break much quicker, and you will not have any option to slack the string off if you have to do anything. and it's not a good look. It's a false economy. Now, what I'm just going to try and get this set up to do is to show you the tuner end of things. So what I'm going to do is you get your string, and the first thing you want to do is you want to get your tuner, spinny tuner thing, which is here behind the mirror. So to make life easy, I like to line up all the holes on the posts first. Otherwise, when you're working, especially when you're working left-handed, to be sort of trying to find where the hole is left-handed is a pain as well. So I line up the post holes, and then I take the first one, slack off the winder underneath, and I put the string through, which might need quite a bit more slacking. And then, because it's a strap, I make sure that the ball of the string is up underneath inside the bridge block. And then I pull it tight. Now this is what you don't lock it off, right? I pull it tight and I pull it back about half a fret, let's say. Then I lock down reasonably hard, but not so hard as you would if you thought you were just using the strength of the locking part on its own. Am I going the right way? Of course I'm going the right way. There's only one way this can go. Dope. So what I've done is I've now got what's almost a loop of wire onto the I've lost my clippers now. There they are. A loop of wire onto the post. I highly recommend you do that. Although it seems you might think it's defeating the object, it's much better to have that because it will give you the option to slack it off if you need to, and to undo it, and to do whatever you've got to do. I don't know what it can be, but on some, for example, on guitars with tune-o-matic bridges like Les Paul copies, then it makes a lot of sense because you often have to mess with the bridge. So I'm going to go there, back about a third of a fret, let's call it. Tighten that on, wind it on, and I'm going to hold the string down so that the loose spare bit goes over the top of it, just to keep it tidy. And it sort of locks it a little bit as well, and then trim. Okay, so trust me on that. If you don't, even if you don't like the idea, even if you don't buy the argument that this allows you to slack off the strings a couple of times without, which you wouldn't be able to do if you hadn't done it this way, then I implore you to buy the argument that locking it down as hard as you would need to secure the strings confidently will already crimp them to the point of near breaking, and they will try and break thereafter, pretty much. You know, they'll easily break thereafter. So do it just so that your strings don't break on you. The whole of this locking tuner business is very crude, using bits of little spikes of metal to hold a little thin string, you know, wound or plain in place is a very crude device. It's just really not very sophisticated, and I think it has its problems, as I've said. So I would use it to be grateful that it allows you to minimize the amount of string, but I would say add some string around that tuner more than most people who buy locking tuners would expect to do, right? But you be the one who does it so that you won't break as many strings, and you will allow yourself to slack the strings off should you need to, whereas nobody else who uses a locking tuner will be able to. Okay, so about a third back, do the crimp, but not so hard. And if you were just depending on that, you would not feel comfortable with that amount of pinch. You'd be wanting more, but it would damage the string. This way, you get the best of both worlds. The least amount of extra string on the post, and the strongest, longest life of string grip. I promise you. Okay, so there we are. I don't know how clear that all was, but there is our 6-strunged guitar. And you can see the Tusq string tree there as well, that we put on some time back. And it's great to have got rid of the metal butterfly type thing, or whatever it's called. That was a truly primitive piece of kit as well. Okay, so Rich, as a beginner, relative beginner, let me give you some advice here that is, I found, has been critical to enjoying guitar playing. Let me tell you from my experience, and this is, you know, if you've heard me say this before, it'd be old hat, but if you're a newcomer, please listen to this. From my experience, the one thing, as you get older and you get more experience, the one thing the things you think matter about guitars, or the things you thought mattered when you were younger, end up not mattering. Like things like brand name, you know, the look of the guitar, the style, all the iconic stuff, not so important. The thing that becomes really important to you as you get experienced and older is that it plays and stays in tune. First and foremost, if you had to put a list of priorities, you could say, well, low playing action, is that top of the list? Actually, you can tolerate a higher playing action above it going out of tune. In other words, the one thing you can't tolerate is if it goes out of tune. If it won't get into tune and it won't stay in tune, you'll not come back and play this guitar. It's as simple as that. So it's critical to, I find that that's the number one thing. The second thing is that it feels easy to play. So it stays in tune, first of all, absolute priority. Second one is that it's easy to play. Third one is it sounds good, which we've taken care of with these quality pickups. The fourth one is what it looks like. And the last of all, the least important, is the name on the headstock. So we've gone at it, and this is what I do all the time in my setups. I've gone at it in that priority order. Now, as a result of that, in everything I do, staying and playing in tune, or playing and staying in tune, is the most critical bit of all. And I can tell you this, that it has got nothing to do with your tuners, has nothing to do with your even your tremolo, which people always blame for going out of tune. Tuning stability has everything to do with your nut, the condition of your nut, and the slack in your strings. Okay, call it, imagine it, for the sake of argument, call it 50% each is responsible. To take care of the 50% that the nut is responsible for, we fitted Tusq. We make sure the slots are free running and there's no friction, okay? And that, once you've got that right, and Tusq is a critical part of that, you've got that 50% taken care of. You've also got the first fret action low, so you won't get notes going sharp played down there, which is another part of the tuning equation. So everything that adds up to the 50% of tuning stability that the nut is responsible for, we've taken care of. And it's no expense spared to get that right. That's the important bit. Now, the other 50% is the slack that is left in your strings. And most people know about that. In fact, every player knows that new strings will go out of tune, okay? And everybody will know that you've got to stretch them a bit, or give them a bit of a playing in and bedding in, whatever terms people use. Truth is, though, is that ordinary stretching will not remove the slack in your strings. You have to go at it positively. So some people genuinely think things like, well, if I tune it up to, you know, E sharp, F, you know, and leave it overnight and then come back to it, it'll be in tune, won't it? And the answer is no, it won't. You have to wring out the slack. So to begin with, for example, this is how I go about it. Get your thumb and forefingers. My thumbs are a mess at the moment with cuts, but the principle is it's definitely got something creaky down here on this bridge. I wonder why it is so creaky. I'll have a look at that. So you get your thumb and forefingers and you stretch the strings. Now, yes, it stresses them, but it's stressing them between soft points. You're not bending them over anything sharp, so that there's not a risk of it breaking. So you go through your whole thing and you stretch out your strings, And then after you've done it once, then you tune it up to pitch. And because at the moment I've got the tremolo set as a hardtail, right? And that means that the springs are all wound in, and the tremolo claw, the screws in the tremolo claw are all wound in, pulling the claw to the front of the guitar. And that means that the springs are currently overpowering the strings. As I tune it up, it'll put more pressure on the strings, which may start to counter it. Right, that's just getting it up to pitch, but we can do it even a bit more accurately, just so you can hear the next bit. Right, so now we're in tune, kind of. And what happens is, guess what? If you stretch the strings, I'm doing a different kind of stretch here. Stretch the strings and it'll put everything massively out of tune again. Now, if you don't do this proactively like this, the amazing thing is that your guitar will shed that slack little bit by little bit over the years. Sometimes a couple of years from now, it will still be letting a little bit loose every time you bend or hit the strings hard. So the secret of this, getting this tuning stability stuff done, is to go back and keep on bending the strings out dynamically, positively, until you've got no more detuning. And I say at this point in time, nothing's happening with the tremolo, it's locked down, so it's acting as a hardtail bridge, so it's not going to confuse us with the tuning, because sometimes if your tremolo is not literally locked down and you pull the strings up like this, then the back end of the bridge will move. Currently it won't do that because the pull of the springs is currently greater by miles than the pull of the strings, because we've got it screwed in. But there we go. That's the downside of doing positive stretching like this. You end up busting a string. That's all right. It's only cost me a set of strings. Despite that, you need to do it. So this is why, by the way, I used to buy Rotor Sound strings, because I used to have an extra E string in every pack for exactly this reason, and they knew that too. That's why they put an extra E in every pack. Mostly people would break them playing, but they would also break them tuning them like that. So you have to keep on doing it. I got unlucky there, but the idea is to, God, this is, what's moved this? Oh, nothing. That's weird. Like it was sitting on the side. Hang on a minute. Is that loose now? Check that. Yeah, so that was one downside of stretching the strings thoroughly. But I still stand by the principle is get it stretched. I tell you what, if sometimes when people, I've bought exotic and expensive strings for people's guitars on occasion when they've requested a particular type, usually something like Elixir, then I am extremely nervous. I will be extremely nervous about how I stretch, and I will back off earlier because I can't afford a whole 17 quid set of Elixirs because I broke the top E. So in this case, you know, these are some Fender strings that I got at a good price per pack of 3, so I'm not going to bleat too much about it, but it's a cost to me. You know, I've just chucked away 3 quid by breaking a string. However, it doesn't change the basic fact is tuning stability is everything, and that's what we're aiming for, and you have to stretch them out until you get that tuning stability, maybe a little bit more carefully than I just did. So in this case I'm back to the high E, and of course high E strings are a lot more delicate than 10s. 9s are a lot more delicate than 10s. So for now, I'm not going to stretch that one too hard. That's my downstairs neighbour who is building his Land Rover down there. Okay, so let's tune all these up again. Okay, now what I'm going to do at this point is double check the action on here, because having had strings off for quite a while, it's entirely possible that I don't know what you can see now, we're running out of views, it's entirely possible that the little grub screws here get to move and the saddles sit at slightly different heights. So just to make sure that that's not the case, I'm trying to get a good shot, I'm guessing. I suppose it's worth just taking that extra second with the mirror. Okay, yeah, so that has moved, that's gone. The other thing that's possibly moved as well, which is going to change this, and I'm glad I double checked, is that I tightened the neck in, and I think the neck pulled in tighter than it was before. That's quite a substantial difference in the playing height. Okay, yeah, so it's worth, or it can be a significant difference, so it's just worth being sure that if you tighten the neck, you double check the action, because a small pull in here makes a big difference to the height of the strings. And I think it's only a small amount of difference here, but it's enough to need to recheck it. Okay. Now, one of the things that when Rich asked me about the tone of the pickups, it's kind of difficult for me to demonstrate it because it's a left-handed guitar and I don't play left-handed guitars. Certainly not well enough to demonstrate the pickup tone. my bad chord playing in left hand mode. Okay, so what was I last going to check? That's good, that's good. I'm not gonna, oh yes, I was gonna check the tone just to make sure that we were in phase, not out of phase. Although, like I say, I can't make this play properly because I am left-handed, right-handed. Right, that's the other thing. Just a little check there. This jack socket is officially loose. I knew that I caught that with my hand. Now, where is the tool for adjusting that? Come on, man. Is it over here in where jack sockets adjusters should live? It must be. It's a sensible place is to have it over here. Right, I'll do that off camera. I'm going to have to find the damn tool. It's a little wooden handled tool that is for adjusting. I had it, and I'm pretty certain I put it over there because that was the only place, I thought that was the only place I'd be needing to use it. But actually, you know what? I could have been wrong because I'm usually up here doing the final test. But either which way, I've got to go looking for it because it ain't there. Nope. Right, I'll tighten that up off camera. Let's just do the final check, which is to make sure we've got in phase pickups. You can see it does this thing with the mirror. Oh look, you're looking at nothing in particular. Volume down, up, tone open, bridge. I think this might be out of phase after all of that. Yep, that's out of phase. Okay, so now this is exactly why you want to have room to undo the strings, because I'm now going to have to set this up and change the wiring around, which is a bit of a pain, but that's what we're going to do. So anyway, I will go looking for the tool that I need, which I can't find, so I'll do those two things together. The other thing I'm going to do, by the way, which I've just discovered on here, I don't know if, yeah, you can still see, is if you look underneath these here pots, now that one's okay, but under the pot here there's a load of plastic scrunching around, which is pretty nasty. So we're going to remove that. There you go. It's just one of the things that they do. They put this plastic on before they screw down these pots, as you can see, and so you end up with this stuff. It's actually caught, and it's underneath this washer, and it catches and it scrapes around as you operate the knobs. And the only way to get rid of it is to either take the pot and undo it completely, or to cut around it like that. But it's a bit horrible. Thankfully it was only, oh no, hang on, there is some more on this one. Okay, so yeah, so what I've got to do now is I've got to go in and I've got to switch over. I'm going to make where I used the black and the bare wire on the humbucker. I used that. I've got to put those, both of those to the switch part. So I'm switching it around, switching the polarity around, which is an absolute pain in the something or other. Yeah, I think that's the case. You can hear, because it's losing the bass, it's robbed of the bass part of the frequency. While it's still playing, and it sounds like a guitar, it's not got the full range of frequencies, because that's the sort of the consequence of the out of phase. The bass, some of the bass frequencies cancel each other out, so you get a thinner sound. Still plays, but gets thinner. So that's my nemesis. Just when you thought it was safe to finish, you start again. But like I say, I'll do this off camera, because then I can put the radio on. So I'm going to switch around the wires, get it the polarity and phase, find the adjuster, the tool for adjusting the jack socket, and I'm put some gentle Loctite on that. As far as the tremolo goes, I'll do that bit now, because I can. So the idea will be to put on the, see what I can see. I'm going to put on the tremolo arm, and what I want to do is, for Rich wants to have available the down only setting, just to be able to use it as a newcomer, try it out. It works like that, but basically we know that the springs are too heavy. So what I'm going to do is I undo the springs on the back of the claw, tremolo claw springs, and I keep going. In a way, you could keep going until the back of the tremolo starts to lift up, which you don't want to play with it like that, but you can keep going until about there, and then you can tighten them back in until a point where you don't take much effort to depress the tremolo, but when you don't depress the tremolo, the springs win out and keep the strings or keep the plate flat on the deck. So right now it's still flat on the deck. It's become easier to operate, but it's still not very easy. So I'll keep going backwards, unscrewing the tremolo spring screws. That's a mouthful of things. Looking around to think, where the hell is the adjuster for the jack socket? Worst comes to worst, I'll do it by hand. I'll take it out again and manually put it together, tighten it up, put some thread lock on it. But now that's beginning to move forward. So we've got a tremolo effect here. Right, now that's starting to, not only is it it's a little bit of bend backwards there, so I can see that the string loading now is just overpowering the springs, so I want it the other way around. So I'll now screw this in a couple more turns on each side. Okay, we're flat on the deck, which is good. That's fine, that's where it'll stay. So that's now set so that when the tremolo is not in use, the bridge stays flat on the deck, the tuning will remain constant, but when you want to use it, it's a very little amount of pressure is required. That's good. Oh, what a pain, the rewiring nightmare. So just before I go, I'll just come back to the front. Remember I said there are times when you'll be grateful, you'll be glad that you built in the ability to take off or undo the strings, which you won't get on locking tuners if you don't do this thing that I did. Now is the time, because to take the plate off, I've got to take these right off. So now all of a sudden I need to take these down. I'm going to undo them, take them right off, but what we'll find is not only are the points where I put the strings on now crimped, is if I tried to do them back up, I would be re-crimping the same spot and they would likely break straight away. But because I've wound on some material, I can now pull them through a little bit further, pull the damaged or weakened string through out of harm's way, and I can then crimp down on a new piece of string, which gives me at least this one chance to take everything out like this. So you wouldn't have had that opportunity if you hadn't have done it that way. Now, it's not necessarily that you're going to be in that same situation as I foolishly found myself in. That's my cross to bear. So I'm going to have to go back to the trim claw here, snip that wire. Going to have to undo the, sorry, you're not looking at anything there. Undo the jack socket wire again. This time I might just have to lengthen it a bit more because I'm going to struggle to reconnect that, losing as I will a little bit of extra wire now. So I'm just going to crop this and we'll tidy this up again in a minute. So now it allows me to take out all of these little screws and remove the whole thing. And then once I've done that, everything out of the way. So little things like that, hard to know, hard to judge whether it's in phase or out of phase. You would suggest that it'd be worth writing down somewhere that iron gear bridge pickup is by default out of phase with Seymour Duncan net single coils. That would be probably a good statement to have jotted down somewhere. Okay, so what I'll do is I will take the I will take this red wire here and I'll put it to the top of the pot, and I'll take the black wires that I glued to the top of the pot and put them to there, and that will change the polarity of the bridge pickup around. How about that? But it's boring, so I'll see you in a minute.